Demos gracias por cada día de vida. That is what Señor Lopez, an elderly veteran from the 1930s Chaco War between Paraguay and Bolivia, repeatedly told us. Julio and I were curious 9-year-olds, eager to watch the construction of a brand new house across the street from where we lived. Señor Lopez was there every day. Not to work, no, he was far too fragile. He would sit on a large construction sand pile, that sand that was used to mix mortar, and observe. He survived the Chaco War only to lose his entire family in an accident, and now homeless. He would often sit on that large sand pile, telling stories to curious children, and with the patience of Job, answer all our questions about war. And at the end of each story, he would add, Demos gracias por cada día de vida. Let's be thankful for each day of life. One day after school, Julio and I ran across the street. Señor Lopez was still taking his siesta nap on that sand pile. And eager to hear more stories, we pulled his arms. He did not wake. He no longer would be able to say, Demos gracias por cada día de vida. Later that afternoon, a city pickup truck stopped. They wrapped him in this old blanket and placed him in the back of the truck. Julio and I watched as they drove that lifeless body away. As far as we knew, he had been a kind and humble man. 3 years ago, I attended the funeral of another elderly man. Unlike Señor Lopez, this one was a multi-millionaire. An icon in the Winnipeg building community who owned dozens of high-rises. At work, we affectionately called him Mr. B. At his life celebration, he was praised for being the savvy entrepreneur who had built up an empire from scratch. A philanthropist generous to a fault. But the word used to describe him best was humble. Some are humble due to circumstances. Mr. B was humble by choice. Being humble does not mean he lacked strong opinions. Like some of my colleagues, I too was fired on several occasions. The following day I would be back at work, for as Mr. B often said, everyone deserves a second chance. Thankfully, he did not limit it to only 2. Ever since my first summer job for Mr. B, I was mesmerized by his down-to-earth, one-of-the-guys disposition. When he noticed I was struggling unloading material, he didn't worry about his well-pressed suit. He jumped in and helped unload. On Fridays, he enjoyed buying drinks for the crew. Not just buy them, he delighted in serving everyone with equal respect, regardless whether you were an architect or a laborer. One time he came to inspect a renovation job. And in the swept together dirt and dust in a corner, he spotted 2 pennies. Boys, you should be ashamed. This may not be worth much, but it still is money. I know what's happening here. I'm paying you guys too much. And then he rubbed them clean and placed them in his pocket. The lesson he taught us was not the value of money for selfish reasons, for everyone knew how generous he was. In the 1990s, in the early 1990s, a fellow in a stolen car hit and destroyed the front steps of an old house in the north end of Winnipeg. In the newspapers, the elderly lady who lived there was featured as having no home insurance. And since the driver had no license, the insurance wouldn't pay. When Mr. B read that article, he told my supervisor, whatever you do today, before you start anything else, go to this address, measure up those stairs, and then to Barkman Concrete and order a new set. Those stairs were delivered in Mr. B's signature style, anonymously, for he preferred not to be thanked. A humble and kind man. In the 1970s, while Mr. B was at the height of building up his empire here in Winnipeg, an elderly veteran from the Chaco War took an extended siesta nap on a dirt pile in South America. If Senor Lopez and Mr. B's end of life would converge, join through the divide of space and time, Mr. B would sit down on that dirt pile, share a few drinks, tell a few war stories of his own, and while holding the veteran's hand, hear him say, "Demos gracias por cada día de vida." Together, they would accept their humble rest. One humble due to circumstances, the other by choice. Humbleness enhancing their abilities, enhancing our abilities to be grateful for each and every day of our lives. Demos gracias por cada día de vida. Over 2,000 years ago, a kind and humble prophet, according to the stories, was born in the midst of herding animals. And later on, in the prime of his life, he accepted the faith of a most torturous and humble death, crucifixion. His teachings are filled with lessons of servanthood and a humble gratitude for each day of our lives. 2020 is coming to a close, and almost 2 million people's lives have been cut short due to the pandemic. We are grateful for every day of our lives. Demos gracias por cada día de vida. Shalom.